Wellbeing Show. I'm your host, Noel McDermott. Just about remember my name these days, but it's getting touch and go with the old memory. Got a great guest on, Hunter, and who's like me, has been flying around all over the place. He's over in the US at the moment. I've just literally got back in my house from having been traveled back from France and ended up in England on train strikes and stuff like that. It's not fun. I'm not in a good mood, world. But I drove back to London from Gatwick and got a nice car to do it. But there you go. So if you're listening to this on the 31st of May at 9 p.m. UK time, then this is live. It'd be lovely to hear from you. My number's +44 7506 319 745. Drop me a line. Otherwise, James will be scanning the airwaves. We're sort of broadcasting on, I was just about to say 97.8 FM, but we're not a radio show. We're broadcasting on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. And James will scan, see if anybody drops any messages. That's about enough from me. Hunter, welcome. You're over in California at the moment, is that right?
Yeah. Right outside of Los Angeles right now. Just flew in from San Jose, Costa Rica last night. So
totally jealous of the Costa Rica, baby.
yeah, it was beautiful. It was a very, very beautiful place.
Yeah. Actually, I'm going to end the show there. I'm just too jealous. I want you to get lost, but I don't want to hear about Costa Rica. All right. A friend of mine, actually, her name's Annie. She spent the whole of lockdown in Costa Rica, which was just absolute. It's like, yeah, I'll do that. That's
yeah. My wife is a British citizen, and we actually had to quarantine in a third country before she could come into America because of all the restrictions.
Okay.
And we had to stay in Antigua for 16 days, which is Eastern Caribbean, and it was like, couldn't quarantine anywhere better,
Yeah, that's another bloke I know. He got COVID over in the Bahamas, but they treated him well.
Yeah, no doubt.
Really good. Really good people. So welcome to the show. It's good to have you. You're based in the UK mostly. Are you over in the US at the moment just doing a bit of work or something?
No, my family lives here, but yeah, I spend a lot of time in the UK, but I'm not specifically based there yet. I'm kind of in the, it's a weird process just trying to do immigration right, and take my time so that it can be done properly. So, but I spend a lot of time in Essex.
Yeah. Well, the UK doesn't make it easy to immigrate.
Well, I'll tell you, it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier than America, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. But well, it was good to hopefully see you again sometime over here. And the reason we invited you on the show is because you have a long and dishonorable or honorable history in recovery, and you've got an interesting story to tell us about your route into recovery. For those that don't know, recovery is about somebody who's chosen to stop using drugs and alcohol and other mind-altering substances, and sometimes process addictions as well, around food or other behaviors. So it's going to be interesting to get to know your story. I mean, you have quite you came from, I think it's called the opioid capital of America.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yeah. So no, that's very accurate. So I, growing up, I grew up a completely normal life right on the border of Ohio and West Virginia. It's called the Mid Ohio Valley. The Ohio River runs right down in the middle of those, and I grew up right on the Ohio River that separates it. So, from being born up until 12 years old, completely normal life. I started to experience issues with ADHD and anxiety and depression. So I was in America. They very much like to over medicate, medication for anything, And so I got prescribed to controlled substances at 12 years old. That mixed with the mental health issues and the fact that I really did not like who I was as a person, I was overweight. I had this weird hair. My teeth were not straight. I would just really did not like who I was. So, a mixture of the mental health, the medication, not liking who I was, feeling out of place, and the fact that I grew up in a very small area, where essentially if you were into drugs, you were kind of automatically separated into that kind of group. So I got connected with people that were not good people.
Mhm.
And essentially I started to smoke. I started to smoke weed and drink alcohol from a very early age.
Mhm.
So all of these things are happening in my life at once. I was a very angry young man. My dad decided to try to be the person that would punish me, and my mom was an enabler, so that added another layer of like confusion and all of that to my life. And my dad and I would get into fights, and I would get arrested. So for the first time, I got arrested at 12 years old. So
Wow.
all of this stuff is happening, and it just kind of put me on a path to self-destruction.
That's very young to be coming into contact with the police. What were they like to you? The police, did they try and help, or were?
Well, my dad was an undercover at one point in time.
Ah,
So all the police knew him. And I also, like I said, I grew up in a very small area. So I actually would be in school with a lot of these like police officers' kids, um, you know, and yeah, so I mean, they knew me. So it was very much a different type of communication than if they were dealing with somebody like in an inner city where nobody knows each other. And, you know, um, but I mean, also it made it easier for me to continue to get in trouble because I was automatically put in that class of people that, you know, I was like a target after that.
so you were sort of labelled by them as a troublemaker and a problem, and sort of whatever contact you had with them, that's the sort of baggage you had. And that's quite a
Yep.
challenge. I mean, sort of, I think anybody would find that a struggle. And you say you were put on medication for your ADHD. Was that sort of speed type medication?
Yeah, it was Adderall. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I want to say to people that around this whole issue, my son has ADHD, and his medication really helps him. But we're very
yeah,
thoughtful.
it helps my daughter has it as well.
Right.
Except I think that the difference between now and then is that they've really done. I mean, that's a significant amount of research that they've done in
Yes.
however many was that 16 years ago. So, um, they've been able to do a significant amount of research
Yeah.
and kind of dial that in a bit. I mean, the even the milligram that my daughter's on in comparison to I was on 30 milligrams, she's on like less than 5, and
Yeah.
it's a different type of medication. So, you know,
It also
it,
it doesn't, just to reassure parents, and we're both doing this now, which is great.
yeah,
The modern versions of these drugs cannot be abused, but Adderall could be abused because it
yeah.
would give you a high, whereas modern versions of these drugs cannot give you a high. They won't. The way
Well, if they're
designed.
still if they're a stimulant, they will. I just think that it comes down to the dosages and also the research that they do with an individual before they put them on the medication. And I also think that the UK does and always has done a better job at finding alternatives before they resort to that type of treatment. At least within the NHS, they put a lot more care into essentially the right treatment plan for the individual. Just
Yeah.
my experience from what I saw.
It's also, I think, that something like ADHD is covered by certain types of legislation as well around
Yeah.
disability and reasonable adaptations, et cetera, which I'm not sure exists in the US. I think my experience of the US is that the first port of call tends to be medication, and as you said, over medication from our perspective.
Yeah.
Um, that there's a limited range of options available because the US doesn't have an integrated system of healthcare that's
Yeah.
available, whereas sort of Europe and the UK does. And
Yeah.
so there are services available that can be used, which are community-based and non-medical, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that makes a big difference. And I don't think people in the UK really appreciate it, the sort of how different that is. Tell us a bit, like, what was it like in the US for you? Because I doubt if you got counselors and support and education about condition. I don't know.
Well, I did. So the thing is, our healthcare system is significantly different. So
Yeah.
it can be a good or a bad thing, in my
Okay.
opinion.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, with us, private care is more easily available if you know, my mom has worked she worked at the same hospital for like 35 or 36 years. So she had private health insurance through her place of employment,
Yeah.
and that made it more readily available for me to get therapists and all of that. However, growing up in a place like Ohio, our Medicaid, because we're so affected by drugs and mental health, our free healthcare, so you know, it's called Medicaid. So that's more readily available to people in the state of Ohio specifically than pretty much any other state.
So
So
wow.
for me, I would have been blessed in that way as well, because we just have more resources available in that state specifically.
Yeah.
Now, because my mom had private health insurance, I could have got treatment in any state in the United States, which later on as an adult I did. But as a juvenile, my mom and the court systems held me accountable to getting therapy and treatment and such, outpatient
Okay.
treatment and such as a juvenile. So, and I also spent a lot of time in different juvenile detention facilities that held me accountable to that as well.
And how, I mean, was that helpful for you, or did that dig the hole sort of deeper for you?
Yeah, you know what's interesting? I've always done really well in a structured environment,
Right.
which I find that a lot of addicts do thrive in structured environments where, you know, there's accountability and, you know, schedules are planned, routine, and all of that. Because, you know, I feel like a lot of us are lacking that. So whenever I was in an environment where I was held accountable to doing work to get better, I always did well. It's whenever I'm left to my own devices that
Okay.
things get a bit
Okay.
chaotic.
Ah, and you never ended up in the army, I guess, then.
No, probably a good thing.
A trained killer hunter might have been a bit too much.
Yeah.
Mind you, also given how many wars your country goes to, sort of there's a lot of damage that happens to your armed forces. So not
There are,
something.
and most of my family has been in the military. I mean, my
Yeah.
grandpa, my sister, my dad, you know, my uncle. I mean, a bunch of people in my family were in the military. So, and I actually have a soft spot for veterans. You know, that's one of the things I put a lot of time into is,
Yeah.
you know, finding resources that are available to veterans. So, yeah.
So there you were as a kid, you were sort of dropping out, getting involved in the court system. You were using street drugs, sort of. So you're also using alcohol. How did the opioids come into the scene? And we should say for people in the UK, they don't really get this, but because we've never had the mass prescribing of opiate medication, opioids, but they were very pushed in the US for a while. And so there has been a huge problem in the US because there were certain types of opioids, which are synthetic opiate medications, that were, I think the company said they were safe, didn't they?
If I'm not mistaken, I actually believe that OxyContin, which is what you're referring to, that's essentially what started the epidemic in America was OxyContin. I do believe that that's a direct derivative of opium, which is it's not synthetic. However, what really did some damage later on was not necessarily medication that was being prescribed through like legitimate doctors, but what it was essentially in the area where I grew up at, you know, there were these doctors that were over prescribing OxyContin, opiate OxyContin. And what happened was they got to a point where a town of like 3,000 people got 2 million, there were 2 million prescriptions wrote. in this town of 3,000 people in 1 year. And what was happening was people were coming from other places to get these medications prescribed to them, and then they were filling them at like a fake pharmacy or a dirty pharmacy that was filling them. And then the federal government found out that it was as severe as what it was, and then they put all of these people in prison. And now it's being, broadcasted all over every news platform in the United States that these doctors were going to prison. Well, then there were people from the inner cities that were thinking, oh, wow, there's whole communities of people that are working class people that have money that are now withdrawing from opiates because they can no longer get them from their doctors. So they came and they sold heroin, and they sold, and then what happened was, who knows where they got it from. That's when the synthetic opioid fentanyl came into the mix, which it's not the fentanyl that was being prescribed by doctors. Those were patches that cancer patients were getting. The fentanyl that's been sold in America is stuff that has been produced by illegal, means through like illegal labs, and then been sold by various cartels. So that's really what killed a bunch of people. It wasn't necessarily just the prescriptions that were coming from doctors. It was the illegal production of these opioids that were then being sold as heroin. People thought it was heroin, but it wasn't. And it was being sold, and it was significantly stronger than what people thought. So for me, the first time that I experienced opiates, I actually was about 13 years old, and I had burned my hand with gunpowder. And only something that would happen in America.
As you do. Yeah.
So I burnt my hand, and I went to the hospital, and I got prescribed, or I got given like a morphine, drip or whatever. But now that I didn't realize it until now, like this time in life, that I actually enjoyed that, and the pain medications that they prescribed to me, I enjoyed it, and I didn't think anything of it. Well, then at 16 years old, I decided to run for my juvenile probation officer. And, I knew I had been getting in trouble. I'd been failing drug tests, and I knew that she was going to essentially put me into what is the juvenile prison system in Ohio. So I decided to run, and I used heroin for the first time at 16 years old. Right. So that's kind of how quickly things progressed for me. But luckily, she caught up to me very, very quickly. And, I got put into the juvenile prison systems, which probably saved my life at that time.
Yeah.
And, so that's kind of how opiates started for me. But then it wasn't until way later on that I actually got physically addicted to opiates. There's a lot more that happened in between those 2 points of time. Yeah.
Okay, so that was your first experience of it. Then this woman finds you, she puts you back in the system is working for you. What's the next step in your story? What was the next bit of experience that happened to you?
Yeah, so I got out of the juvenile prison system whenever I was 17 turning 18. Okay. And my family moved from Ohio to West Virginia, which is like moving from, Essex to London. It's right down the street. So that was a much bigger city. And I was then on juvenile parole. And because I was on juvenile parole, I knew that I wanted to do drugs, but I wanted to do something that I could get away with. So I met these people and at the time you could buy, do you know what spice is? They call it spice in the UK.
It's a synthetic opioid or synthetic cannabinoid. I'm not quite sure which one it is.
Yeah, it's like they sell it as synthetic marijuana, but it's one of the strongest drugs that I've ever done. Physically strong. So after using it for like a couple of weeks, I was very physically dependent on it, and I could pass a drug test using it. So, I got away with it for like maybe a year, and my daughter, so things are a bit scattered at this point in my life because I was using, a significant amount of this drug, and it really affected me. So I apologize.
What sort of age were you at this point, Hunter? 17, turning 18?
Between 18 and 19. So between 18 and 19 is when I got really heavily into the spice. and I met my daughter's mom, who is also an addict, and essentially she got pregnant with our daughter,
Mhm.
and I at the same time that she was pregnant, these drugs became illegal in America. They could no longer sell them over the counter, and people couldn't produce them within the United States. So they became very, very hard to get. So now this drug that I'm like super dependent on is completely gone.
Yeah,
Can't find it anywhere.
yeah, yeah,
So now I'm withdrawing, and at this point, I don't care that I'm on juvenile parole. And that's when I started to go back to using other substances. And, I essentially dodged my parole officer for like the next, probably year. Well,
Mhm.
during that period of time, my daughter was born. I was 19 years old. And I mean, I was so in the grip of addiction. I share this story all the time that my daughter was born, and whenever like literally as she was born, I was holding her, and I said, "There's my baby," and she literally looked at me and smiled. She didn't cry or anything. She had this smile on her face from where she recognized my voice, and it was like one of the most beautiful moments of my life. And I was very much sober at that moment.
Mhm.
But then, a few hours later, I'm in the parking lot getting
Yeah,
high
yeah,
because that's how strong the drugs were for me. I mean, it didn't matter how blessed I was in the moment. It was just it took over everything.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
And so you're withdrawing from the spice, you've got a child on the scene, you're still only a kid as far as I'm concerned, and all this
yep,
shit going on. I mean, that's like a lot of stuff to be dealing with. What's happening with your own family, your parents, and where are
yeah.
they in all of this? What's going on there?
Well, at the time, my parents had been physically split up because I absolutely terrorized their whole life. Being on drugs and caused lots of issues between them. So they had been split up, but when my dad came back to see my daughter right after she was born, and he realized how bad I was on the drugs, he realized that my mom actually needed him, and that it didn't matter how bad off I was, and they actually kind of reunited partially because of my addiction, and him seeing my daughter. And at that point in time, my mom was a really bad enabler, and she was very uneducated. And she was very naive to addiction.
Mhm.
Even though she's like one of the smartest people I know, she was very, very naive to addiction. And my dad came back and saw how bad I was, and he was like, "Oh no, this something has to happen,
Mhm.
right?" So he actually, we kind of clashed like we always had whenever I was a juvenile. And I got in trouble again in West Virginia. Well, at that point that I got in trouble from us fighting, or actually it was just an argument, but I still got in trouble. Um, I got arrested in West Virginia, and then my parole officer in Ohio found out. So in the state of Ohio, you can be on juvenile parole until you're 21.
Okay, yeah.
So, and at this time I'm 19. So that caught up to me very quickly, and then they put me back into the juvenile prison system. But this time I came out, uh, and I literally got high like as soon as I came out of the prison system, like
Did
literally
you
on
get
the drive home,
did you get
like any
treatment?
good addict.
Did you get treatment in prison for the sort of using?
No, not at that time. No, no,
Okay.
I don't think. I think it was past. So the juvenile prison system in Ohio is really bad. I mean, like gangs, riots. Like they're pretty much just there to make sure that people are, safe. Essentially, they're
Yeah.
not really there to. I mean, I did get the only education that I really got was in the juvenile prison system. The first time I went in, and that was incredible. They really helped me in that way.
Hmm.
Um, and also it was the only time I had dental care as well. Like not that I didn't have. They actually fixed my teeth from where they were crooked before, and I told you that I really
Yeah,
disliked
yeah,
how I
yeah,
looked.
yeah,
They
yeah.
actually fixed my teeth because they had a program that leaned toward helping people feel more self confident and stuff. So
Yeah.
they did help me a lot in that way. Um, but essentially, they kind of released me from juvenile parole because they were pretty much done dealing with me at this point. And for the first time since I was 12 years old, I was completely free from any kind of like, justice system, right? So essentially, at this time, I was about 20 years old. And in between 20 and 21, I literally just went
I
on
just
like,
want to stop for a second because you're about
yep,
20 years old. I'm just like hearing this story and just thinking, Jesus Christ, what has happened to you? I'm like,
yep.
how are you dealing with this inside your head? I mean, it's
I
like,
wasn't. I
right.
wasn't. That was the whole point in using. I wasn't dealing with it. I was avoiding it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, things I started using all different kinds of substances like
Oh,
psychedelics,
oh,
heroin, fentanyl, anything that I could get my hands on at this point in time. And yeah, really, really just did a bunch of damage to my family and my life. And my parents had custody of my daughter, which thank God that they did, because
yeah,
who knows what would have happened.
quite.
Um, and at when I turned 21, I used meth for the first time, actually on my 21st birthday.
Mhm.
And that was a substance that brought me to my knees very, very quickly. It's a very bad substance. I mean, you know, it's so cheap and it's scary. I mean, it's bad. So between 21 and 23, I attempted to get sober 6 different times,
Right.
and essentially that was, goes back to being on my mom's health insurance, and I had the ability to go to private treatment facilities literally 6 different times.
Yeah.
uh, you know, and every single time that I would go to these facilities, my parents would be sold that these places offered, mental health treatment and trauma therapy, which, I really needed trauma therapy. That was something that, through the years of substance abuse, I put myself in situations that, really traumatized, did a lot of really bad things to fuel my addiction.
Yeah.
So my parents knew that I needed the mental health treatment and the trauma therapy just as much as I needed treatment for my addiction.
Mhm.
So all of these places had good salesmen, saying, "Oh yeah, we provide X, Y, and Z," and they really didn't.
Yeah.
So I would go into treatment with an open mind every single time because the meth really brought me to my knees.
Yeah.
And you know, I would get there and they would never actually, it would look, the places looked very nice from the outside looking in. And some of them might have provided decent treatment, but it just wasn't what I needed. So
Mm.
I was stuck in this pattern of rehab, sobriety, short-term sobriety, and then relapse. And I
So
went
what
from
did,
Florida.
just out of interest, what did they give
Yeah.
you? Like what type of services did they give you?
Well, the one thing that definitely happened every single time that I went to treatment was I got detoxed properly. So, I was completely physically free from the substances.
And that would be a
Um,
medically assisted detox?
yep, yep. Yeah, it was always, I've never been somebody that used medically assisted treatment. So
Mhm.
it was never like I was on Suboxone or Subutex or anything, which is the substances that we use in America. I
Yeah.
was only on those for 7 to 10 days during
Sure.
detox. Some people choose to do it for years, you know. So for me, I
And
very
it's a
much
valid,
got.
I mean, I will say as a clinician, it's a valid choice. I mean, I'm not a great believer in there's only one way of doing things. And I think I know
Yep.
some people, particularly in opiate sort of recovery, they may choose to be on some sort of medication for the rest of their life because it gives them a quality of life, and that's fine. I mean, I think
Yeah,
there's
I just don't think it's the solution to everything. For me, I did a lot of damage to my family. I did a lot of damage to myself spiritually and mentally. And I think that thinking that medication is like a one size fit all solution. And I've seen a lot of people relapse in that mindset as well,
again,
equally. So,
I think there may be cultural differences because I guess I wouldn't see it on its own. And I'm thinking from the UK and European context. there would be a whole raft of support and services in place, and the medication would be an aspect of it. It would not be the treatment. It would be something that would be part of a raft of services. I think in the US it maybe is different. I'm also very concerned not to have a simplistic conversation or black and white conversation about these things. I think these things exist on a spectrum, and it's about the individual finding the path that works for them, as opposed to. But I'm coming back to your story rather than being on a soapbox, because I can get on soapboxes if I'm not careful.
Me too.
But I'll jump off the soapbox for a second. Coming back to your story, I guess I understand the type of institution that you're talking about. I've seen them a lot, and they're not great, and there's a lot of institutions that have grown up because of various funding and there's money to be made, but they don't necessarily have a great set of services themselves. But there is some use, and I wonder if this was true for you. There's some use from a harm reduction perspective of having periods of time when you're not using chaotically, at least. And that gives you a period of time in which maybe your mind can clear a little bit. Was that for you? Was that true or not?
Well, in my opinion, it made it even more dangerous, because, if you think about it, you're getting an addict that hasn't had any period of sobriety for the last, at this point, let's say 9 or 10 years.
Yeah.
And now, you've got 30 to 60 days sober, and then you relapse. Now your tolerance is nowhere near what it was.
I think there's always been a debate about abstinence-based approaches having that inherent risk in them, because relapse is so dangerous. And again, I think we could have let's have that debate, because for a long time the UK refused to adopt abstinence-based approaches for that reason, which is that relapse is dangerous. And so we would only have harm minimization approaches. Now, I can see the value of both, but you were going to make another point, I think, about sort of short periods of detox and then leading to a relapse, meaning that your using got worse, I guess, is the point that you were going to make. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it kind of to answer what you just spoke on as well. I'll actually get to that. So essentially, in my opinion, having a 12-step community, people that are actually holding me accountable, a sponsor, and actively working the 12 steps, that was a significant part of what I was missing and what actually has worked for me in my life. So these places never gave me the trauma therapy I needed. They never gave me the mental health treatment that I needed. And realistically, 30 to 60 days is not long enough to treat trauma anyway, or mental health.
Well, actually, and also I think it's probably contraindicated to do it at that point anyway, because I think those types of treatments need a bit of stability in the using first. So it's a chicken and egg, isn't it? But my clinical experience is that you need to manage the using before really you can do the trauma work. And so I think it's a bit hopeful if people are offering trauma work in primary treatment. I'm like, how? Yeah. So I don't see how it's going to happen, man. I really don't.
No, trust me. I have the same views on it, and it actually even irks me to this day whenever I see it. I mean, it's just like automatically I'm like, nah.
For me, it's like if you start the trauma treatment to that point, that's a good way to get somebody to relapse. To be honest, it's because of what you're going to be asked them to do. So I think maybe we've got some mind share on that one, but your experience was that these periods of sobriety were too short; they didn't really work, and also the treatment centres were not giving you the access to the peer groups to support you. Was that the story?
Yeah. You know what? I had the ability to be part of them in every one of those places, but I wasn't actually pushed in that direction. Essentially, I wasn't held accountable to that. And if like I said earlier, I thrive in a structured environment where I'm held accountable to do stuff, right?
Yeah.
So what had happened was the fifth treatment facility that I went to, I acquired 5 months of sobriety. So this is the longest period of sobriety I've had, like
Yeah.
literally
Yeah. I
since
think
I was
that's a
12 years old.
significant period of sobriety as well. I mean, it genuinely is.
It was. It
Yeah.
was. But I didn't have, I didn't have a sponsor. I didn't have any type of community. I had never actively worked the 12 steps. I was getting some trauma therapy in that period of time, and I was getting some mental health treatment. So what had happened was this was in California. I moved back to West Virginia.
Yeah.
I lost the job that I acquired. I had started working. I lost the job that I had. I'm now living at home with my parents who have had custody of my daughter for the last, 4 years or however long it was. My girlfriend broke up with me. So I'm living in this state of chaos. All of this stuff is happening. And I really don't have anybody to call. Who am I going to call? If I had a sponsor and I had a community of guys who understood me that could support me, maybe I could have called one of them and they could have talked me through it. But then I get put in a situation where my life is absolute chaos. It's bringing up all of this trauma.
Yeah.
It's bringing up all of this, my mental health stuff. Um, and then, I get put in a situation where drugs are around me
Yeah.
automatically. That's my go-to in a
Yeah.
situation like this. And at the time, I knew no other way, right? So I relapsed in a matter of 3 weeks. I lost about a stone and a half no, it was about 45 pounds. So I believe that's about 2.5 stone.
Yeah.
In a matter of 3 weeks. I literally had picked my whole entire body, like, because whenever you're on stimulants, for me,
Yeah.
I would be a compulsive picker. So I'd pick at my skin. Um, I had slept maybe 3 days in 3 weeks. I had barely drank any water or ate any food. I was very, very dehydrated.
Mhm.
So I was in this state of psychosis almost already,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
not
yeah.
well.
Definitely would have been. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Really
yeah,
deranged state. Absolutely.
yeah,
Hallucinations, all sorts of things would have been going on.
yeah. I was in extreme paranoia. I mean, this was the worst state that I'd ever been in my whole life. Every time I relapsed, it got worse and worse whenever I'd use again. So at this point, I'm like, this is like my fifth rock bottom. I didn't think that I could, before I didn't think I could go any further down. But this is like the worst
You
that
got
it's
the
ever
drill
been,
out and you
right?
went a bit deeper. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, a girl decided to poison the drugs that I was doing in an attempt to hurt me or take my life. And she put something called Flocka into the meth that I was using. So, it's a synthetic stimulant. It's
Mhm.
similar to bath salts. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but um, she poisoned the drugs I was doing. And for 3 days, I didn't know who I was, didn't know where I was, like completely delusional, like psychos, like complete psychosis, hearing things, seeing things. And my parents, by this point, they're very much experienced with what treatment facilities wouldn't work for me.
Yeah.
So, my dad is putting me in the shower with like Epsom salts, trying to detox me. And I would go, and for 3 days, I slept in between my parents because I was absolutely terrified. And every time I'd wake up, I'd still be in psychosis. So, finally, I come out of it. I
And
start
I
to
just want
come
to
to,
stop there for a second, just because,
yep,
like, this is a terrifying story. It really is. And just for people who might be listening, who might be feeling a bit triggered about this, let's just take a little breath. It's really scary stuff,
it
really,
is.
what happened to you. And it's horrible. It's
Yep,
really horrible. I mean, your poor parents must have been out of their mind as well. And
they
certainly
were.
you were. You were definitely out of your mind. And for people who are listening, just be aware that if this is triggering for you, if it's bringing up memories for you, which some people will have similar types of experiences, memories. And you talked about how traumatizing some of your trauma responses to your life experiences. And some people may be listening to this and having those types of experiences and flashbacks. And so I
Yep,
just encourage you to think about your needs, not you, Hunter, but the people who are listening. Um, you may need to reach out to people. You may need to talk to somebody. If you're in recovery and you're having flashbacks now, definitely talk to your sponsor.
Definitely,
have a
give your
chat with
sponsor a
them.
call.
It's like, I think it's something that happens when we get into the stories, that because we've told them ourselves a lot, maybe we
Yeah.
don't have the same emotional content. For people listening, though, there's a different type of emotional content. So just slowing it down a little bit, giving us a chance to be human beings and acknowledge how
Yeah.
frightening it is. Now, that was like, that's awful stuff, Hunter. That's horrific
Yeah.
what happened to you. And I'm so sorry that you went
Yeah.
through. I'm really sorry that you had to go through that. But there is going to be light at the end of this tunnel, I know. But it must have been absolutely awful, really.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was a life-changing experience for me, to say the least.
Right.
It was, probably, the single most traumatic thing that's ever happened to me,
Absolutely.
um,
Yeah.
and, sorry, it came out a bit. Um, so yeah, my dad's trying to manage me while I'm in this psychosis, and my mom is on this time. What my mom did different was she started to research the different treatment facilities, and
Okay.
then she called her insurance company and she said, "Hey, can you confirm that this facility provides X, Y, and Z?" And they said, "Oh yeah, we're in network with that facility. Yes, we can confirm that that's what they provide."
Right.
So, sorry, I keep getting calls there.
It's okay.
Um, yeah, whenever I came out of it, my parents had made a thorough plan for me
Right.
to get treatment. So, whenever I was able to, and you got to remember, I've been using for 3 weeks straight, so now my body's dependent on the drugs,
Yeah.
and she just poisoned me. So now I'm withdrawing, and
Yeah.
my body is damaged from the drugs that she's put me, because I couldn't get high for 3 days. I was on the moon, and they made a plan for me. They essentially put me on the phone for my assessment call, because every proper facility does an assessment.
Mhm.
Um, so I completed the assessment. They packed my bags and drove me 2 hours to the airport. To fly to treatment for the last time. This is the last time I flew to treatment, and I literally got high in their back seat all the way to the airport, because there was no way I was making it to
Yeah.
treatment safely. It wasn't possible. So, I got to the airport, and actually we stopped before we got to the airport, and there's like this picture of me. It's probably like one of the most famous before and after pictures of somebody recovering from addiction on the internet. I mean, it's been seen millions and millions of times. So they took this picture of me in this restaurant, and I remember my dad looked at me and he said, "Do you want to be buried or do you want to be cremated? Because if you don't stop, that's the only choices that you have left." And I remember it just hit me like, I don't want to die. And I damn sure do not want to live like this anymore. I don't want to suffer anymore. And yeah, I decided right then that I wasn't going to die. I wasn't going to suffer. And I was going to take treatment as seriously as possible. Um, yeah, so I flew to treatment and I detoxed, and then they put me straight into it's what we call in America PHP, through outpatient levels of care. So it's a 90-day minimum treatment program. So in this treatment program, I lived in a sober living environment, and then every day, Monday through Friday, was transported to outpatient treatment. So for 90 days, I took trauma therapy and mental health treatment very seriously.
Mhm.
I dived into it. I kind of was just like, "Hey, listen, lead me and do with me what you will. Like, just help me." And then in my free time, I literally went to 2 AA meetings a day for
Mhm.
90 days. So I went to 180 AA meetings
Mhm.
in 90 days. And I got a sponsor, and I worked the 12 steps, and I woke up every day and made my bed at 6 a.m. And I stuck to a structured schedule for 90 days. And I got very involved with the men in the program, and built fellowship and friendships that I'm still friends with, these people to this day. So yeah, I mean, I really took it seriously. I really got involved in a community, and it's in my opinion, this is one of the big things that the UK is missing. I think that there's like maybe 3 or 4 outpatient 90-day style programs that I've encountered, and I think that that's one of the things that we do right in the US is that we kind of have a 120-day treatment model where people come into a program and they do detox residential, PHP, IOP, OP. And then if they want to stay in the community longer, they can transition into sober living and live there for as long as they want.
I've just been very aware not to get on my soapbox here. because I'm not sure I would agree with that, because I think there are other models that work. And certainly I think the US does that model really well. Partly the US has that model because it has no other option. Whereas I think in the UK and Europe, we have other options. So if we think of somewhere like Portugal, for example, very little treatment, but their substance misuse programs are fantastic. And part of their model of
it's funded differently there as well.
I think it's it's sort of like there are other ways of thinking about it, but I think those approaches in the US, the ones that are integrated in the way you describe, particularly, and I'm thinking of, I don't know if you've read Circles of Recovery. It's a fantastic piece of research that looks at this whole point that you're making, which is that, and it's based in the US, to be honest, this piece of research by an emeritus professor of addiction medicine. And he was a guy who advised Obama when Obama was looking at funding about sort of what works. And the research he shows quite clearly is that when you do exactly what you said, which is particularly in the US treatment model, when you assertively link people into, in your case, 12-step recovery groups, you increase the efficacy of the treatment by at least 40%.
Yeah,
it's that powerful. And so you go from a treatment provision, which generally you would say it's about anywhere between 12 and 20% effective in most, as you experience, the treatment centers, between 12 and 20% success rates. And you there triple and quadruple and even more the success rates of the treatment programs by doing exactly what you said, which is you have local AA groups that you assertively link people into and you demand that they go to and you hold them accountable and you get them involved in those recovery communities. Suddenly you then have an effective treatment model, which it's extraordinary. And you're sort of living testament to that piece of research in many ways. It's like you are the model patient. You went through all these systems where it didn't have it. You then went through this system and it worked. And it clearly worked. I'm interested sort of, and again, because sometimes people bring this up and it is a genuine issue, the 12-step approach for some people can be very off-putting. Can be off-putting because it's normative. There are these odd words that are used, spiritual words, the God word is used and stuff like that. Let's discuss that a little bit and what your experience of that was like and how you sort of square that circle for yourself.
Yeah, what's amazing about my experience now is that I've had the ability to work with families and individuals from around the world that are from all walks of life. I mean, people that are completely, atheist or agnostic, people that are very devout Muslim, people that are Christian, and I'll tell you. And with that comes, there can be a lot of resentments toward religion from people that, let's say somebody that their family is devout Muslim, and it's a very, that's a religion that you're not allowed to use substances in, period. And, let's say you're the only individual in your family that, doesn't practice, and you have an issue with substance abuse. So that can be very off-putting. But what I'll tell you is the people that I've seen, even from that background or that have that type of resentment, if they choose to work the steps and kind of ignore that word, the word God and the 12 steps, if they choose to do the actual work behind it, the 12 steps, then at some point in time, they'll come up with their own understanding of
Yeah.
what that means.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it doesn't have, you know what I tell people? I say, hey, listen, work the 12 steps, become a sponsor and start to sponsor other people and stay sober for a year. And then tell me what your experience is, because at the end of the day, if you're addicted and you're suffering and you're unhappy, I mean, it's at least worth a try. You know what I mean? You're suffering anyway. Is it really going to get worse if you give it a try, if you put the work in and actually, just have a little bit of faith that there's something.
And I would,
that's
to be honest, I would say to people, as somebody who's worked in the field for years and known a lot of people in that process, that there, you will inevitably come across in the rooms, as they say, people who try and force their ideas on you, like you will do anywhere in the world, in any walk of life. But actually, there isn't a requirement that people convert to any belief system within 12 steps. Quite the opposite, I would say. That there's a heterogeneity of beliefs and opinions. But for you, what was just thinking about? You say work the steps. What actually do you mean? I mean, obviously there's 12 steps, you do some work, but what was your experience of what that meant and what that involved for you?
So for me, essentially the 12 steps is an outline of things that you can do to take action to essentially treat your spiritual and mental condition and get to a point where abstinence is possible for you, right? Now, every single, it's funny because I've been to so many, in the last, let's say 3 weeks, I've been to South Africa, Costa Rica, and here in America, and I have went to a meeting in every single place. And even though, they're speaking the same language essentially, right? Through the 12 steps, every single area has their own sponsorship families and they have their own way of working these 12 steps, right? And I try not to talk too much about the 12 steps on social media or anything like that, because it kind of becomes quite conflicting, because then it seems rather attraction than promotion than attraction. So but in short terms, it's a layout to fix your spiritual and mental condition, and repair some of the damage of your past, and heal.
Well, let
me
try
yourself.
it this way, because I'm interested. I suppose one of my experiences is clinically, personally, and professionally, is that people can be put off by the terminology unnecessarily. So demystifying, changing the words and making it more accessible means that more people can get some recovery. Where I come from, I think there's lots of different ways of doing it. Not just
me too.
There's not just lots of different ways of doing the steps, but there's lots of different programs. So there's smart recovery, there's Buddhist forms of recovery, whatever. I mean, what I would say to people is it's really a lifelong task to find what works for you. But that's true of your mental health. That's true of your recovery from addiction. That's true of anything. It's about setting your life on a course whereby you are striving to be better than you were yesterday or better than you were this morning. And so that's for all of us, is that. But trying to demystify some of these things. So clearly, there are atheists who are in 12-step recovery. Clearly, there are people who have all sorts of religions walked of life. So that's one myth debunked. It's not, as far as I understand, a specific program or even a religious program. But the work itself, other people might feel it's a little bit cultish. Are they brainwashing you? Is this what's happening? What you mean by working the steps? That's something you join Scientology or something like that. Without getting into, I know what you mean about the controversies about the correct or the incorrect ways of doing steps, but really I'm not interested in that. I think it's a waste of time conversation. But I'm interested in sort of opening this up, because it might save somebody's life if we open it up. That's all, really.
Yeah. Look. At the end of the day, if you struggle with the terminology used in the 12 steps, then I would highly encourage you to go to a meeting,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And raise your hand and say, "Hi, I'm so and so." You don't have to identify as an alcoholic or addict if you don't want to.
Yeah.
Raise your hand and say, "Hi, my name is Hunter, and this is what I struggle with. Can somebody
Yeah.
that is understanding and loving and kind
That's
please
great
explain
advice.
it to me?" You
That's
know,
great advice.
because if you're in a good meeting, there's going to be people that totally get it and came in the same way,
Yeah,
and they
I
have their
agree.
own way of
I agree.
communicating with you,
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if Alcoholics Anonymous brainwashed me, then I'm happy to be brainwashed because I'm 5 years sober and I'm happy and healthy and
Good for you. Good for
yeah,
you.
yeah.
But you also now you support people in getting into their own recovery as well, I think, don't you? That's
Yeah.
what you hear. So tell me about that.
So for me, I personally believe that treatment is the best stepping stone to long-term recovery.
Okay.
For a lot of people, we come into this or attempt this in a state where mentally and physically, we're not able to. So I personally believe. Now, with that said, I've seen people that have 20 or 30 years of sobriety or recovery, and they didn't go to treatment.
Yeah.
But from
Yeah.
my personal experience, treatment is the best way. So, long story short, um, I am a international treatment advocate. I work with programs around the world that vary in cost. So, somebody that can't afford somewhere in the UK, I have various options in other countries. So, what I'll do is I'll perform an assessment, a short assessment, not a clinical assessment. I'll have an understand because I'm not a clinician. So, I'll get an understanding of your situation or your loved one's situation, and then I'll say, hey, listen, here are some options that I feel fit your specific needs or your specific situation. And I would encourage that you have a conversation with, these various people and
Mhm.
what feels right to you and what you can afford and what you're able to do. I would love to help you with that. So that's kind of one of the things that I do, right? The other thing that I do is sober companionship and sober transportation,
Yeah.
which is for a very specific type of person, somebody that literally just can't make it to treatment on their own, that really is in a bad situation that needs to be safely transported, or maybe let's say somebody that is struggling on the back end of treatment that needs companionship and needs help essentially transitioning into normal life, and somebody that's a safe and sober person for them to be around. I help with that as well.
Cool.
Um, Now that's just part of what I do within the treatment industry. The other part of what I do is whenever I was about 2 weeks sober and I was in sober living, I started to document my journey on social
Really?
media
Right.
with treatment and recovery and addiction. And also another thing that I started to document was I had a big issue with relationships. So I started to almost make fun of myself and the relationships that I had, just to bring humor to something that I really struggled with. So early on, I gained about 30 or 40,000 followers by talking about being a drug addict and making fun of the relationships that I had or that I was getting myself into. And I also made fun of my addiction as well, and just kind of brought light to something that was dark. And that's how I gained my original following. And then I started to get into TikTok and Facebook Reels and Instagram Reels and YouTube and all of that. And since then, those 30 or 40,000 followers has now grown to over 1 million followers internationally.
Right.
Um, so I'm able to provide people around the world with resources that are local to them, that are free, that are private. Pretty much anybody that reaches out to me, I put as much effort into them as anybody else, and I
Fantastic.
find them some kind of support. So
Brilliant.
that's kind of both sides of what I do.
So, so that we can sort of help support you. You got a website? What's the website?
The easiest way to find me is on Facebook or Instagram,
Okay.
or yeah, I mean anywhere that there's a social media platform. But I have two ways to find me. There's Hunter Michael Shepard, which is my personal brand, and
Yeah.
then I have Hunter versus Addiction. And that's I mean, they're both my personal brands, but that's just kind of two ways to find me on any social
James
media
will put
platform.
links out. So Instagram is a good place to get you. Did you say Facebook is a good place to get you?
Yep,
Yeah,
and LinkedIn as well.
and
So,
LinkedIn.
and
Okay,
yeah,
and both those names work on those platforms. All those platforms. Yeah.
yep. It's
Okay.
it's even though I've got 1 million followers, it's me that responds to every single message. So,
Super. Super.
yeah,
Look, Hunter, it's been really awesome to have you here.
yeah.
And
Thank you.
hopefully, let me know when you're back in the UK, and we'll grab a coffee or something like
Yeah.
that. Maybe
Are you going? Are you going to be at UCASAD?
No, no,
Okay. Well,
unlikely.
I'll be back on the 15th. I'll be back on the 15th, and yeah, I'll shoot you a message.
Yeah,
Just
I'll
so you
give
know.
you a bell, and we'll go and have a coffee, maybe grab a meeting or something like that. It'd be really good to catch up with you. And like I said, I'm going to be over in California with my son in August. So if you're around, then we'll catch up as well and stuff like that. So it'd be lovely to see you. It's been really good to have you
Amazing.
here on the show. Really good luck with whatever it is you're doing in America at the moment. Best to your family.
Thank you.
They must be over the moon to see you like this, and you know, continue the good work, my friend. You stay there, folks. I shall see you all next week. I have no idea who's on. Somebody amazing, because everybody who comes on the show is amazing, to be honest. But I'll see you all next week. And now I'm going to sort of sign off. I'm going to sort of relax after a stressful day of traveling, but it's all first world problems. So I'm happy with that. All right. See you all next week, folks. You stay there, Hunter.